When cloud came about in its, as we know it today, I think a lot of customers jumped on the bandwagon. They went, we're going all in on cloud, and they were, very steadfast in terms of how they were going to adopt, but didn't necessarily understand the programmatics, didn't necessarily understand the lock-ins.
What are some of the reasons why companies still remain hesitant to make this move? It may be as expensive or more expensive than having on-prem, but there is the value element to that. There's the elements of, as you say, agility, flexibility. How does that actually equate to return on investment and value?
As a customer, I'd be looking at it and saying, where do I want to be? How do I want to get there? Who am I going to partner with, and who can give me the best bouquet of skills to be able to support it long term?
The cloud conversation has changed. It's no longer just about infrastructure and cost saving. The cloud is more about agility, value, the ability to scale, and having the ability to respond to change at speed. But yet for many South African businesses, the question remains, to cloud or not to cloud? So today we have with us Chris Richardson, Executive Cloud Go-to-Market at Altron Digital Business, who's going to answer this question for us and dig into what does it mean to cloud, and what does it mean to not cloud, and how should companies choose? He has deep experience in guiding organizations across industries through digital transformation and brings valuable insight into what makes a cloud journey successful and how Altron Digital Business helps clients move from decision to value. Welcome, Chris. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I've been in the industry a very long time. Spent a certain amount of time at the OEMs, learning my trade and kind of understanding how large organizations and OEMs try to build value with customers through licensing programs and such. Got a lot of experience in distribution, so had a wide view of the world. Engaged with a lot of partners across many different geos, exposure across multiple different hyperscalers and ISVs to kind of understand the questions that customers ask or partners ask in terms of how they deliver value. And now at Altron Digital Business, building, arguably one of the best platforms from a partner in the South African ecosystem. And yeah, really trying to get it to grips with what value really means to a customer.
Yeah, which is interesting because you kind of posed us the question to cloud or not to cloud.
Yes.
And I would love to start there. What made you choose that approach?
Going back to your opening statement, the ability for South African companies, and not even just South African companies across Africa, trying to decide where a workload should go, what applications should belong where. And I think a lot of those questions get asked at not only at an enterprise level, but even at an SMB or SMC level. Customers are going, how do I make a change? How do I make my company more agile? How do I benefit from this cloud thing that people are talking about, and who should I be doing it with? And that's kind of the ultimate question, and that's kind of where the topic came from.
Yeah. So what is the South African sort of business adoption at the moment when it comes to cloud? Are we still reluctant? Are companies increasingly moving towards it? What is the current environment like?
I think you've got two flavors. One, you've got customers that, when cloud came about, it's been around for a very long time, just in different versions and phases, but when cloud came about in its, as we know it today, I think a lot of customers jumped on the bandwagon. They went, we're going all in on cloud, and they were, very steadfast in terms of how they were going to adopt, but didn't necessarily understand the programmatics, didn't necessarily understand the lock-ins. And I think that's why, you've got some customers that have engaged previously, had a bad experience in cloud, and have maybe come back to on-prem. And potentially they didn't have the right partner, or they didn't have the right OEM, or the OEM hadn't matured to the level that they expected, or they didn't get the agility or the cost saving that they thought was going to happen. And that's kind of a poignant point. Thinking you're going to save money on cloud is a big misnomer, if I can call it that. If you put the right things in place, if you put all the right mechanisms in place, then yes, you can save money, but you create agility. I think that the second part of it is, some customers have kind of sat on the fence, invested in additional hardware, relied on hosting or co-location-based hosting to secure their environment, or they want to see the blinking light on the server sometimes, and that's okay. That's also a form of cloud. I think a lot of people go, hosting is not cloud. Hosting is cloud because it's a consumption-based service. I think South African companies have got a fair amount of way to go in terms of adoption, but I think the partner community and the thinking also has a fair way to go.
Yeah, I think there's two things here, and I'd like to take the conversation back to 2 points you raised initially, which is value and agility.
Yes.
And I think, as you were saying, cost has often been an issue. Companies have ended up with bill shock. It's a common conversation point. But then again, it may be as expensive or more expensive than having on-prem, but there is the value element to that. There's the elements of, as you say, agility, flexibility. How does that actually equate to return on investment and value for your customer?
I think you've got to kind of look at it in a couple of ways. One, investing in cloud without having the correct processes and procedures and budgeting is a fundamental. If you're not budgeting for it properly, then you're going to have that bill shock because your first month billing is inevitably going to be more than what you expected. There's going to be certain inefficiencies that existed in a legacy system that got moved onto cloud. There's going to be inefficiencies that existed in the application layer that got refactored, or the manpower to be able to get that thing, whatever it may be, into the cloud environment. But you've also got a couple of components in terms of customers kind of looking at it and saying, how should I have worked on the cloud process within my organization if I was going to adopt it? And if I'm engaged with the right partner. Often we saw partners that came in and they were like, we can do everything because we've done these things before on hardware, but not necessarily understanding the cloud motion, the SaaS components that were needed to be put in place.
Yeah, that's interesting because that takes us to the second half of what you said earlier, which is that the partner ecosystem also needs to change and adapt.
Yeah.
Which makes me want to ask, a lot of technology has changed, right? So, for example, a simple example, in the old days, plugging in a webcam, how long did it take you to troubleshoot it and upload a driver? Now you just plug it in the back of your computer and it's done, right? The same principle should surely be applying to shifting over to the cloud. There are new processes, new strategies. But are companies aware of that? And are vendors actually inside that ecosystem enough that they can create that value and make it easier?
I think vendors are doing a lot of work. You look at the speed in terms of vendors' ability to build new products, new solutions. I mean, there are thousands of new, whether it be ISV programs that come out on the likes of AWS and Azure and the likes. I think the vendors are doing a lot of work. I think in each geography, there's going to be a certain level of maturity that partners need to adapt to, but also the customer need. Creating that customer need, I don't think is necessarily a thing that partners have traditionally driven. It's been very much a stock and sell type of engagement, or delivering price over value. Customers, to go to the previous point, was customers are looking for agility in some cases. They're looking to be able to expand stores if they're in retail, develop additional research techniques if they're in the medical industry, find out easier ways to do banking in the financial sector. I think those companies are looking for that agility. But I think in terms of ecosystems and partners, are we there yet? It's debatable.
So I think this takes us neatly into asking about the downsides, the warning signs. What should companies be aware of when they are considering the cloud?
You've always got to kind of look at it from a base layer perspective. Is your company ready to go on that journey? Can you actually do a level of support internally? And have you budgeted properly to consume cloud or SaaS? And I know a few years ago, people spoke about it at length. Do we still drive those motions? I don't know. I think from a company perspective, those are absolute questions you should be asking. Have I moved my business from a capital to an operating expenditure company? Can I adopt cloud with a certain level of making sure that there's business continuity? Sometimes you have customers that will move workloads or business critical workloads into an environment, potentially have the wrong partner, potentially not understand the full scope of moving that application, and then it brings the company down. And those are things that you want to avoid at all costs. As a customer, what I would be doing is I would be looking at running environments in parallel. Running a parallel environment, yes, there's going to be certain costs that have to be absorbed in certain places, but it gives you that business continuity. Also looking at your business and going, what's your roadmap? Where do you want to go? Do you want to open new stores? Do you want to create new platforms for medical research? Do you want to create new platforms for banking? I don't think that those are necessarily things that people think about, and those need to be top of mind.
Yeah, so it's actually they need to have a deeper insight into what cloud can potentially bring.
Yeah, even at a migration level, how long is this going to take? Yeah. Timelines, and
business disruption.
100%.
Yeah,
making sure timelines are kept in check. Technical expertise are things that are spoken at length about in this country, about the shortage of it. Maybe not necessarily using technical expertise in your business, but looking outside and into the partner ecosystem.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really good at. Those partners that have invested in deep skills, deep knowledge, and made sure that we've got the right people to be able to provide the right advice across multiple hyperscalers, I think is fundamentally important, because not one is going to be the best fit.
Yeah, so it's one size fits all is a lie.
Yes, absolutely.
Also in clothing, can I just say?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think this also means that we need to also examine how the benefits of moving to cloud, like what can companies expect if they're aware of the kind of the down floors, they do an in-depth investigation, they partner with the right company.
Yeah.
What can they expect from cloud? I think over the long and the short term.
I think 100% the agility.
Yeah.
The ability to be agile in this world is a fundamental. It's going to give them a foot over their competitors.
And what do you mean by agile? Sorry, I'm just going to interrogate that. Like, what is the definition of that within the business space?
So as an example, being able to spin up a service in a matter of minutes rather than a full development cycle and it taking months. If you think about being able to create a data repository or a data warehouse, on the hyperscalers, you can do that within a couple of minutes. You're not having to go and consult out or, bring in external parties to be able to build those things for you from scratch. They exist already. And there are deep, deep, deep skills that exist within those OEMs, and they built a lot of these things with the likes of the ISVs to be able to create those values. Partners' ability to bring that to a customer and say, Mr. Customer, you should be using this because it is going to give you the edge. And it's going to give you the edge short-term and long-term because this is the roadmap that you need to build in order to scale it. I think scalability is a massive component of it. Being able to spin up and spin down, not being tied in. A lot of customers will be tied into particular licenses or particular commitment-based programs. The ability to use those when you need them, but also to be able to use other ones. Go in and say, well, I have a certain storage requirement, I can use this vendor. I have a certain compute requirement, I can use this vendor. I have a licensing component, I can use this vendor. Or productivity requirement is good. It's all about balance from a cloud perspective. And then short term, if you're going into cloud and thinking you're going to save money short term, that's just the wrong thing. Long term, if you look at, data center ownership, cooling, hardware refresh cycles, all of those kind of things. Is cloud going to give you a long-term benefit in terms of that? Absolutely.
So we've unpacked the business value. We've talked about the benefits. We've talked about the risks. But what are some of the reasons why companies still remain hesitant to make this move?
There's so many, hey. I think there's a security factor.
Yeah.
We've got our East and our West friends that are at loggerheads against each other, which from a local, we're the ham and the sandwich sometimes. And I think from a business perspective, you've got to make the right decision for you. I'm the first person to put up my hand and say, maybe cloud isn't for you right now. Staying on-prem is, perhaps a better suit for your business. But understanding on-prem could also mean a local hosting provider. And that hosting provider can be providing a like-for-like type of solution. They're obviously not going to have the plethora of services and, SaaS catalog that the likes of an AWS or Microsoft have. But there's always stages that customers need to go through. There's a level of hesitancy around security, like I mentioned, around, where their data resides.
Data security is a big thing.
geographical, but I think those things are kind of loosening up because, some customers are open to it, others are not. But I think it's very dependent on the customer. I think skills, the ability to maintain and manage systems that exist on something you can't touch and feel, is a very foreign thing to a lot of people. And also you look at the cost overheads potentially. If you haven't done the correct cost exercises, and got the right people involved in helping you to blueprint your environment, you're going to kind of see those first initial costs, and they might scare you off a little bit. But if you get the right people in place, like we've got at Altron, we've definitely advised people in the right way, and we've seen a lot of our customers benefit from it.
Yeah, actually, so the skills comment is actually quite interesting for me because and this is where you can correct me if I'm wrong, I've always understood it to be that moving to the cloud allows you to effectively bypass the skills issue to a certain extent because you are relying on external skill sets, the maintenance of systems updates, those kind of things are all sitting in someone else's hands, someone else's pocket. You're paying for that infrastructure to be consistent.
Yeah.
So where does the skills gap come in?
I think there's certain components of that, and I'm not going to say you're wrong. I'm going to say there's probably,
sort of right.
Yeah, sort of right. There's kind of a caveat to that.
Yeah.
So while the infrastructure and the services and the cooling and the kind of that component is offset from the customer, I think there's always a engagement with the actual SaaS above the line application layer. So making sure that base layer is well architected. If you build something wrong and expect to put something on top of it, inevitably it's going to fail. If you build something right and you kind of use the baseline frameworks that we live and breathe with in the cloud world, you're most certainly going to have a better experience, because then you've got your storage is built properly, your compute is built properly, memory is built properly, and you've got your network. Ultimately, everything kind of touches a network somewhere. So you're going to make sure from a firewall and from a network security perspective that all of those prerequisites are in place. You're going to have a much better experience. Those skills exist at that layer. They exist at that layer in terms of solution architects and pre-sales engineers that understand the baseline of building that framework properly.
Yeah, so that takes us very neatly to Altron Digital Business and how you help organizations to manage all of these different layers, concerns, and considerations. Would you talk us through kind of where you guys step in?
Yeah, so we step in really at ground floor. We get involved with our customers from that base layer, understanding what that instance that they have already looks like, whether they're in the cloud or whether they have a hosted infrastructure that they're looking at moving to the cloud, or vice versa. We are agnostic. We're effectively consulting in a way that we're looking at their hyperscaler journey and saying, yes, it's a good idea or it's a bad idea. Number two is making sure that that base framework is in place. Doing things like assessments, well-architected reviews, security reviews, and really giving the customer the confidence that whether it's an application or whether it's a basic storage requirement, that they're making the right choice. Then there's obviously the engagement with the chosen hyperscaler that we use in that customer's environment. And because we're agnostic, we very much look at it the wider world. And like I mentioned earlier, there could be a storage compute, there could be a licensing component, there could be a couple of different components that customer needs to consume. And we'll make sure that from a programmatic perspective and from a pricing perspective that they see all those benefits.
And what do you believe Altron Digital Business brings in terms of value to your customers? What is the value? How do you squeeze out the value from the cloud and give them that answer to the question?
So if you look at our business, if we look at that baseline, so, we very much, if you look at our managed services that we do, we'll look at that baseline, we'll provide that baseline report and that assessment to make sure that that foundational work is done and is done correctly. We'll then help them to migrate it, manage it, and as well as support it from a application or even from a basic requirement, whatever the customer's need may be, because every customer's requirement is going to be different.
Yeah.
And we have a huge catalog of services that we do around managed services, and making sure that that customer is ultimately always up. We don't want to have the customer impacted in terms of what they purchase or the advice that we've given. So we fully back-to-back every single thing that we do from a managed services perspective, regardless of the hyperscaler that we put it on.
Okay, and you stay with your customer throughout the journey?
We absolutely do.
Okay.
We handhold. there's a lot of hand-holding going on, in terms of walking them through the journey. And, you've got to get to a stage of looking at the long-term view from a customer perspective. They might have organizational changes or political changes that might affect them as a business, where they need to consolidate back into a certain region or repatriate some of that data into a different solution. And we absolutely will walk that journey with them.
Yeah, and I think that brings me to asking, what can you talk us through any examples of customers that you've worked with? Just give us an example of how something has gone just really well, and that really showcases how you guys step up.
Yeah, I mean, I can't mention specifics in terms of actual customers, but, if you look at what we've done in the banking industry,
Okay.
from a license support perspective, so from a end user compute perspective, if you look at the modernization that we've put into some retailers around how they consume or how they open new stores, giving them that flexibility to not have to go and buy infrastructure, put it down in perhaps the store or at a co-location site, to get their return on investment in terms of spinning up those stores really, really quickly, has been, quite a cool story. Because, you think about a retailer opening, whether it's a fast food store or whether it's a shopping store, they often will take a long time to get those systems in place, whether it's the point of sales devices or whether it's the actual till points. And we've got those in place very, very quickly and connected them to a hyperscaler, which allowed them to scale really quickly. Some of the engagements that we've had, we've got retailers that have opened stores at a rapid rate, just because of the agility that we've given them.
That's amazing, which takes us back to agility, which
Yes.
is brilliant,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So looking forward, how do you see the cloud landscape kind of evolving over the next 12 to 18 months?
Well, I think, we might have to ask our American and our Chinese friends, depending on how that goes. But, I think from a South African standpoint, we've still got a fair way to go. If you look at the percentage of workloads that have moved to the cloud, we're still, in the low double digits. There's a long way to go, but it's all based on choice. It's a choice on whether they want to move and whether the partner community and the vendor community can actually support it. South Africans are, sometimes stubborn in our thinking. But, some of us are very progressive and we want to move really, really, really quickly. But I think from our standpoint and from my standpoint, I'm looking at it and saying, as a customer, what would I want to be doing? Would I want to adopt the cloud? Would I want to maybe use some of my existing infrastructure and progress that journey over a long period of time? It's also based on different verticals. Some customers in very agile verticals are going to make very quick moves. Others are going to take longer. That's okay. Doing cloud on your own terms is 100% what you should be doing. Some of the vendors are going to evolve. You're going to see their platforms evolve. You're going to see their agnostic way of working together might even evolve. Some of the largest hyperscalers are their biggest customers of each other. Means they're learning from each other as well. As a customer, I'd be looking at it and saying, where do I want to be? How do I want to get there? Who am I going to partner with, and who can give me the best bouquet of skills to be able to support it long term?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, who can you walk this journey with, then navigate, not necessarily obstacles, but the constant change.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So to wrap up, answering me just in one sentence, if you can, to cloud or not to cloud?
I'd do it on my own terms, and I'd find the right partner. Altron most certainly is that right partner because we've got the wider set of managed services skills. We're agnostic in the way we engage with our customer, and we definitely walk that journey with them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chris. It has
Appreciate
been
it.
such a pleasure to have
Yeah.
you on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.